Grandma secretly sold my childhood memorabilia to teach me a lesson about growing up. Growing up, my grandmother and I always had a close bond. She was the kind of grandma who would spoil me with cookies, knit me scarves, and tell me stories about her younger days. But as much as I loved her, she had this old school mentality about life, very tough love, as she liked to call it. Sometimes it was helpful, like when she'd push me to stick with piano lessons when I wanted to quit. Other times, it felt unnecessary, like when she'd criticize me for being too sentimental about my belongings. For context, I'm a 27-year-old who still holds quite a few memories from my childhood. It's not like my apartment is a shrine to my younger years or anything. I've just kept things that have sentimental value, like my first stuffed animal, some old trophies from middle school soccer, and a box of handwritten notes my friends passed me in class back in high school. These things make me smile, and honestly, I didn't think much of holding on to them. My grandmother, on the other hand, saw it differently. She's been telling me for years that I need to grow up and stop clinging to the past. She's always been vocal about how she thinks I'm too attached to useless stuff and how I should focus more on building a future. I usually just brushed it off because, well, it's my stuff and my life, right? Fast forward to a couple of months ago when I decided to move apartments. It wasn't a huge move, just a couple of blocks away, but it gave me a chance to reorganize my things. I brought a few boxes of memorabilia to my parents' house for temporary storage because I didn't have the closet space in my new place yet. My grandmother, who often visits my parents, must have noticed the boxes when she was over one day. When I finally went to pick them up a few weeks later, I couldn't find two of the boxes. I asked my mum about it, and she looked confused, saying she hadn't touched them. That's when my grandmother chimed in with, those old things? I sold them at a garage sale last weekend. You're welcome." My heart sank. "You did what?" I asked, trying to keep calm. She looked completely unfazed and said, "You're 27, dear. You don't need to hold on to those childish things anymore. Someone else can enjoy them now, and you'll learn to let go. It's time to grow up." I was in complete shock. I tried to explain that those items weren't just childish things to me, they were memories, pieces of my life that meant a lot. But she just waved me off, saying I was being dramatic and that I'd thank her later. I spent the next few days calling around, trying to track down where she'd sold them. She couldn't even remember who bought what, saying, "It's not like they were valuable." The thing is, they were valuable to me. One of the boxes she sold had my stuffed animal, Maxie, who's been with me since I was born. Another had a scrapbook I made with my late dad, filled with concert tickets, pressed flowers, and photos from our trips together. Losing those things felt like losing a part of my past. When I confronted her again, she doubled down, saying she was teaching me a lesson about not being so sentimental. She genuinely thought she'd done me a favor, and when I told her how upset I was, she just rolled her eyes and said, "You'll get over it." My mom, to her credit, was furious at my grandmother for overstepping, but the damage was already done. My mom and I even went to a few local thrift stores to see if we could track anything down, but it was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Now, I feel completely torn. On one hand, she's my grandmother, and I know she thought she was doing what's best for me. On the other hand, I'm devastated and feel betrayed. She had no right to sell my things, especially without asking. I'm trying to figure out how to move forward from this. Do I confront her again and risk straining our relationship? Do I let it go, knowing I'll never get those items back? Right now, I'm stuck in this mix of sadness and anger, and I'm not sure what to do. To make matters worse, some family members are taking her side, saying she didn't mean any harm and that I'm being too attached to junk. Others are supportive and agree that what she did was out of line. I'm at a loss. How do you even begin to rebuild trust after something like this? And how do I stop feeling like a piece of my life was stolen from me? Update 1, 2 weeks later. First off, thank you to everyone who commented and reached out after my initial post. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that my feelings were valid and that I wasn't being overly sentimental or dramatic. Reading your stories and advice helped me process what happened, even if I'm still not entirely over it. A lot has happened in the past 2 weeks, and I wanted to share an update and maybe get more insight because this situation just keeps unfolding in ways I didn't expect. After reading some of the responses to my post, I realized I hadn't fully explained the family dynamics at play. My grandmother, who's 74, is a very strong-willed woman. She raised 4 kids on her own after my grandfather passed away. And while that's admirable, it's also shaped her tough love approach. She genuinely believes her actions were for my benefit, which is part of what makes this so frustrating. She doesn't see how much harm she caused. A few people suggested that maybe my grandmother didn't understand the sentimental value of the items she sold. Let me be clear, I had mentioned these items to her before, especially the scrapbook my dad and I made together. She knew how important they were. That's why her decision felt more like a deliberate overstep than an innocent mistake. After sitting with my feelings for a few days, I decided to confront my grandmother again. This time, I wanted to approach the conversation with a bit more structure and less emotion, hoping she might actually listen. I asked her to meet me at my mom's house so we could talk in person. When we sat down, I told her how deeply hurt I was and explained again what those items meant to me. I even brought up specific examples, like how the scrapbook was one of the few tangible connections I had left to my dad. I told her I wasn't trying to be confrontational, but that I needed her to understand the impact of what she did. Her response: "Well, life isn't about holding on to the past. Your dad wouldn't want you clinging to that old book. He'd want you to move forward." I was floored. I couldn't believe she would invoke my dad's memory like that, especially when she knows how much I miss him. I told her I didn't think he'd ever be okay with her selling something we made together. She just shrugged and said, "You'll thank me one day." At that point, I realized she wasn't going to apologize or even acknowledge that she'd done something wrong. I ended the conversation and left, feeling even more hurt than before. Since then, the situation has become a full-blown family issue. My mom is still furious with my grandmother and has been very supportive, but my uncle, her oldest son, called me to say I was blowing things out of proportion. He said that grandma comes from a different time and that I should let it go for the sake of family harmony. Meanwhile, my cousin, who's closer to my age, called to tell me she thought grandma was completely out of line. She even offered to help me search for the items online or at local thrift stores. I really appreciated her support, but it also made me realize how divided our family is over this. I took some advice from the comments on my original post and have been scouring online marketplaces and local resale groups to see if I can track down any of the items. So far, I haven't had much luck, but I'm not giving up. I've also started seeing a therapist to help me process everything, not just the loss of the items, but also the betrayal and the complicated feelings I have about my grandmother. It's been helpful to have a space to unpack all of this, especially since some family members are making me feel like I'm in the wrong for being upset. Right now, I'm trying to focus on moving forward without completely cutting my grandmother out of my life. It's hard because every time I think about her, I feel this mix of love, anger, and sadness. I know she's set in her ways, but part of me still hopes she'll realize how much she hurts me. At this point, I'm not sure what the next steps are. Do I keep trying to make her see my side, or do I accept that she'll never understand? And how do I navigate family events without letting this tension overshadow everything? I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially if you've dealt with similar family dynamics. Thank you again for your support. It's been a lifeline during this mess. Update 2. About a month later. I didn't expect to be back with another update so soon, but here we are. It's been an eventful month, and things have taken some unexpected turns. I've also had a lot of time to reflect on everything, and I want to clarify a few things based on some questions and comments I've received. First, let me address something that keeps coming up. Some people asked if I'm sure my grandma really sold the items and didn't just get rid of them out of spite. I genuinely believe she sold them. Grandma might be stubborn, but she's not wasteful. She made comments about teaching me to let go, while also mentioning the money she made, so I'm certain she put them up for sale somewhere. Now, onto the recent developments. After my last update, my cousin, bless her, took the initiative to help me track down the sold items. She scoured local thrift shops and online resale platforms, reaching out to sellers and even posting in community groups. She was relentless. At one point, she thought she'd found my scrapbook in an online listing, but when we contacted the seller, it turned out to be a similar-looking book. Still, her effort meant so much to me. Around 2 weeks ago, she called me with some surprising news. While checking a consignment shop in our town, she spotted a set of vintage toys that looked exactly like the ones my grandmother had sold. She sent me pictures, and sure enough, they were mine. We confirmed it by looking at some tiny markings I remembered making as a kid. Here's where it gets interesting. The store owner told us the seller had brought in a box of items a little over a month ago, and she described someone who matched my grandma's description to a T. My cousin explained the situation to the shop owner, and she agreed to hold the items for us while we figured things out. I decided to buy back the toys, even though it felt ridiculous to spend money on things that were originally mine. It wasn't about the cost, it was about reclaiming a piece of my childhood that I thought was lost forever. This whole experience has made me more determined to keep looking for the scrapbook. If I could find the toys, maybe there's still hope for the book. Meanwhile, things with Grandma have been tense, to say the least. When I told her about finding the toys, she rolled her eyes and said, "If you cared that much, you could have done something about it sooner." I was speechless. It's like she refuses to acknowledge any wrongdoing and doubles down instead. Some family members have continued to weigh in, with varying opinions. My mom has been a rock through all of this, but my uncle keeps pushing the narrative that I'm being dramatic and need to move on. He even made a snide comment about how I wasted money buying back the toys. I've decided to limit contact with him for now because his negativity is exhausting. In the midst of all this, I've realized just how much this situation has taught me about boundaries. I've started setting firmer ones with Grandma, which hasn't been easy. She doesn't take kindly to being called out, but I've made it clear that her actions hurt me and that I need space to heal. One silver lining in all of this is the support I've received from my cousin and a few close friends. They've reminded me that it's okay to stand up for myself, even if it ruffles feathers within the family. I'm also continuing therapy, which has been incredibly helpful in unpacking the emotional baggage this situation has stirred up. I'm still actively searching for the scrapbook, and I've reached out to more local shops and online communities. The chances of finding it feel slim, but I'm holding on to hope. Even if I never get it back, I'm determined to honor those memories in other ways, maybe by creating a new scrapbook or compiling photos and stories from my dad's life. Update 3. 2 weeks later. I didn't think I'd have another update so soon, but some unexpected developments have come up. First, let me clarify a few things since there's been some confusion. A lot of people asked why my grandmother hasn't apologized or even acknowledged what she did. Honestly, that's just who she is. She's incredibly stubborn and sees admitting she was wrong as some sort of defeat. I've stopped expecting her to own up to her actions, but that doesn't mean I've stopped holding her accountable. Now, onto the latest. After buying back the toys from the consignment shop, I've been more determined than ever to find the scrapbook. With my cousin's help, I've expanded my search to include estate sales, flea markets, and even Facebook Marketplace. It's a long shot, but I refuse to give up. Here's the surprising part. I got a lead. A local flea market vendor reached out to say she remembered seeing a scrapbook that matched the description I posted in a community group. She couldn't recall exactly who bought it, but she gave me a time frame and even remembered some details about the buyer, a middle-aged woman who mentioned wanting it for art projects. I'm not sure where this will lead, but at least it's something. I've started posting in more groups and forums, hoping that the person who bought it might see my messages. It feels like a needle in a haystack situation, but at least there's a glimmer of hope. On the family front, things remain tense. Grandma hasn't brought up the toys or the scrapbook since I told her about finding the toys. I've kept my distance from her, and it's been surprisingly freeing not to feel obliged to engage in small talk that ignores the elephant in the room. My mom continues to be supportive, but my uncle is still on Grandma's side, insisting I'm being obsessive and need to move on. I've stopped engaging with him entirely, it's just not worth the emotional drain. One positive thing to come out of all this is the response from people in my community and online. So many strangers have been kind enough to help with a search or offer words of encouragement. It's a reminder that there are still good people out there, even when family lets you down. I don't have much more to report right now, but I'm staying optimistic about finding the scrapbook. If I get another lead or anything changes with Grandma, I'll be sure to update. For now, I'm trying to focus on moving forward while still honoring those parts of my past that mean so much to me.